The night of the party is etched into my memory like a wound that refuses to heal. I can still hear the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, and the distant rhythm of the music that set the scene for my humiliation. It was supposed to be an evening of celebration, a night for us to step out of our routines, reconnect with friends, and maybe even with each other. But instead, it became the night everything shifted. I remember watching Sophia as we got ready, her excitement palpable as she carefully selected her outfit. The sequin dress she chose shimmered with every movement, hugging her frame in a way that drew attention, but not mine. Lately, it seemed like her energy wasn't meant for me anymore, like I was just another fixture in the house, a lamp or a coat rack, something there but unnoticed. I convinced myself it was in my head, but a voice deep inside whispered that it wasn't. We arrived at Caleb's mansion just as the party was hitting its stride. The place was extravagant, as always, with chandeliers casting a golden glow over the crowd and servers weaving through the room with trays of champagne flutes. Caleb greeted us at the door, his easy grin and loud voice making it clear he was already a few drinks in. "Ethan, Sophia, glad you could make it," he said, pulling me into a quick hug before turning to Sophia. His gaze lingered just a little too long on her dress, but I ignored it. Caleb had always been a flirt, but he knew better than to cross the line with me. The evening started innocently enough. I made small talk with Caleb and a few mutual friends, while Sophia floated from group to group, laughing and charming everyone in her orbit. It was her natural state. She thrived in the spotlight. I used to admire that about her, but tonight, something felt different. She wasn't just charming. She was deliberate. Her laugh was louder, her gestures more animated, and her gaze lingered too long on someone I hadn't even noticed at first, Damian. I spotted them across the room, standing close enough that their conversation seemed intimate despite the noise of the party. Damian was all effortless charisma, his sharp cheekbones and perfectly styled hair making him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He was an artist, the type who never seemed to take life too seriously, but always managed to land on his feet. People loved him, but I'd always found him insufferable. At first, I told myself it was nothing. They were just talking. Sophia was social. It was who she was. But as the night went on, their proximity became harder to ignore. I watched as Damian leaned in close to whisper something in her ear, making her throw her head back in laughter. The knot in my stomach tightened when she placed a hand on his arm, the gesture too familiar, too intimate. I tried to stay calm, to focus on my own conversations, but my attention kept drifting back to them. At one point, Rachel, my closest friend in the room, leaned over and said quietly, "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, why?" She gave me a look that told me she wasn't buying it. "You've been staring at them for the last 10 minutes. I didn't respond because what could I say? That I felt like my wife was slipping away from me in real time? That I was too afraid to confront her in case I was wrong? Or worse, in case I was right? Then it happened. The music shifted to a slower, sultrier rhythm, and without hesitation, Damian extended his hand to Sophia. She hesitated for only a moment before taking it, letting him lead her to the center of the room where others were already swaying to the beat. I watched, frozen, as they began to dance. It wasn't an innocent dance, not by a long shot. Their bodies moved in sync, too close for comfort, their chemistry undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people turned to watch. Caleb's voice cut through the murmurs with a nervous laugh. "Well, looks like Damian still got those moves." I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I stood there, feeling like an outsider in my own life, my fists clenching at my sides as the woman I loved ignored me completely. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause, but it wasn't the good kind. It was the awkward, scattered clapping of people who didn't know how to react to what they'd just seen. Sophia and Damian didn't seem to notice, or maybe they didn't care. She threw her head back and laughed again, oblivious to the eyes on her or the tension radiating from me. By the end of the night, they were all anyone could talk about. Not me, not Caleb's extravagant party, not the food or the music, just Sophia and Damian. The whispers followed us out the door and into the car, where she sat beside me, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word on the drive home. I couldn't trust myself to speak without exploding, but as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, one thought kept looping in my mind. By the end of the night, she might have been the talk of the town, but she wouldn't like the reasons why. The morning after the party felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that carries the weight of unresolved anger. Sophia slept in, her hair splayed across the pillow like nothing had happened the night before, like she hadn't spent the evening humiliating me in front of our friends. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, my mind replaying every detail of the night. The laughter, the whispers, her hand in Damian's. It wasn't just the humiliation that haunted me. It was the way she seemed completely unaffected by it all, as though I didn't exist in her world last night. She danced with Damian, laughed with him, ignored me completely, and now, here I was, stewing in silence while she slept peacefully upstairs. My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of my thoughts. I picked it up and saw a text from Rachel. "You okay? Call me if you want to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to respond. Rachel had seen it all. She'd been there, standing right next to me when Sophia and Damian became the center of attention. She'd even tried to pull me into a conversation to distract me, but her efforts had been pointless. My eyes had been glued to the train wreck unfolding in front of me. Before I could decide what to say, another message came through, this time from Caleb. "Hey man, sorry about last night. Call me if you want to grab a drink and vent." Caleb, the host of the party and the self-proclaimed neutral mediator of our friend group. He always meant well, but his inability to take a side made him just as frustrating as the people causing the problems. By the time Sophia came downstairs, I had already finished my coffee and rinsed the mug, mostly as an excuse to keep my hands busy. She walked into the kitchen, still in her silk robe, her expression casual, almost too casual. "Morning," she said, her voice light as if nothing was wrong. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms as I watched her pour herself a cup of coffee. She didn't even look at me, and that stung more than I cared to admit. "You have anything you want to say?" I finally asked, my voice calm but cold. She froze for a moment, the cup halfway to her lips, before setting it down on the counter. "About what?" I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. "Don't play dumb, Sophia. About last night. About Damian. About how you managed to make us the talk of the party for all the wrong reasons." Her brows furrowed, and she crossed her arms, mirroring my stance. "It was just dancing, Ethan. Don't make this into something it's not." "Just dancing?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay composed. "You ignored me the entire night, Sophia. You didn't just dance with him. You threw yourself at him in front of everyone. Do you know how that looked? How it felt?" She sighed, rolling her eyes in a way that made my blood boil. "Ethan, you're being dramatic. Damian and I were just having fun. That's what people do at parties." "Fun?" I snapped, pushing off the counter and taking a step closer to her. "Is that what you call humiliating your husband in front of all our friends? Fun?" Her expression shifted then, a flicker of guilt crossing her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," she said, her tone softer now. "But you can't keep blaming me for everything, Ethan. Maybe if you loosened up once in a while, I wouldn't have to look for excitement elsewhere." The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at her, trying to process what she just said. "Look for excitement elsewhere?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Is that what Damian is to you? Excitement?" She didn't answer, but the way her gaze dropped to the floor told me everything I needed to know. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. I busied myself with work, emails, anything to avoid being in the same room as her. But the texts from Rachel and Caleb kept coming, each one a reminder of the public spectacle Sophia had made of our marriage. By the evening, the whispers had started to spread beyond the party. I got a call from James, a friend who wasn't even at the party but had already heard about it through the grapevine. "Ethan, I don't want to pry," he said carefully, "but is everything okay with you and Sophia? I've been hearing some things." I assured him it was fine, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. Nothing was fine. My wife had danced with another man in front of everyone, ignored me, and then blamed me for her actions. And now, our friends were gossiping about us like we were characters in some soap opera. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder how we'd gotten here. Where had it gone wrong? And more importantly, could we ever fix it? Or was this the beginning of the end? The days following the party stretched into a blur of cold silences and tense interactions. Sophia and I danced around each other like strangers in our own home, neither willing to be the first to break the fragile truce of avoidance. I buried myself in work, and she pretended nothing had happened, going about her day with a confidence that felt like a deliberate provocation. But the quiet wasn't sustainable. The anger bubbling beneath the surface needed an outlet, and it didn't take long for the dam to break. It started on a Saturday morning. I was at the dining table, sipping coffee and skimming emails, when Sophia walked in, her phone in hand and her face glowing with what could only be described as amusement. She was scrolling through social media, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed something. The sight of her so unbothered, so unaffected, ignited something in me. "You're really not going to say anything, are you?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to make her pause mid-scroll. She looked up, her brows furrowed as if she had no idea what I was talking about. "Say anything about what?" "About the party. About Damian. About the fact that everyone we know is probably still talking about it," I said, setting my coffee mug down with a little more force than necessary. Sophia sighed, setting her phone on the counter. "Ethan, we've been over this. It was just dancing. Why are you still so hung up on it?" I stood up, unable to keep my frustration contained any longer. "Because it wasn't just dancing, Sophia. You ignored me the entire night, threw yourself at Damian in front of all our friends, and then acted like it was no big deal. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Humiliating for who? For you?" "Because it sure sounds like you're making this all about your ego." "My ego?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't about my ego. This is about respect. You disrespected me, Sophia. You disrespected our marriage." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she threw her hands up in exasperation. "You want to talk about respect? Fine. Let's talk about it. How much respect do you show me, Ethan? You're always so focused on work, on your routines, on keeping everything perfect, but you barely even look at me anymore. I feel invisible." The words hit me like a slap, but I refused to back down. "So your solution is to dance with another man? To make me look like a fool in front of everyone? That's how you fix feeling invisible?" She glared at me, her cheeks flushed with anger. "Damian made me feel noticed, Ethan. He made me feel alive. Something you haven't done in years." The room went silent after that, her words hanging between us like a guillotine. I stared at her, stunned, as she turned away and grabbed her phone, retreating to the living room. I stood there for a long moment, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, trying to process what she had just said. Damian made her feel alive. The words echoed in my mind, cutting deeper than I thought possible. I had always known there were cracks in our marriage, moments of tension, of distance, but hearing her say it out loud was like having those cracks split wide open. And Damian? He wasn't just some random guy at a party. He was someone who had exploited those cracks, someone who had inserted himself into our lives like a parasite. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I needed to understand how we had gotten here, and more importantly, what role Damian had played in all of it. But first, I needed answers from Sophia. That evening, I approached her again, calmer this time but no less determined. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. She sighed, setting her phone aside. "What now, Ethan?" "I need to know," I said, meeting her gaze. "How long has this been going on?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely offended. "How long has what been going on?" "You and Damian," I said, my voice steady. "How long has he been making you feel alive?" She stared at me, her lips pressing into a thin line. "There's nothing going on between me and Damian," she said finally. "He's just a friend." A friend, I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. Friends don't act the way you two did at that party. She rolled her eyes, leaning back against the couch. You're reading too much into it, Ethan. Damian and I danced. That's it. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. Not for me. Because deep down, I knew there was more to it. More than she was willing to admit, even to herself. And if she wasn't going to give me the answers I needed, I'd find them another way. This wasn't just about Damian anymore. This was about figuring out whether our marriage still had a chance, or if it had already slipped through my fingers. I've always believed that actions speak louder than words. And right now, Sophia's actions, or her lack of them, were screaming at me. Her refusal to take accountability, her constant downplaying of Damian, and her deflection of every question I asked left me with no choice. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. The first step was gathering what I already knew about Damian. It wasn't much, just bits and pieces I'd picked up over the years. He was an artist, someone Sophia had met through Caleb. I didn't know exactly when or how their friendship had grown, but it was clear that he had become more than just another name in her social circle. The party had made that painfully obvious. I reached out to James, my old college buddy, and now a lawyer with a knack for uncovering information. He wasn't someone who pried unnecessarily, but when I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate to help. Damian Parker, he said when I called him. I know the name. Bit of a social climber, isn't he? That's putting it lightly, I muttered, pacing my home office. Can you dig into him? I don't need anything invasive, just whatever's out there. Give me a couple of days, James said. I'll see what I can find. While James worked on his end, I started asking questions of my own. Casual ones at first, dropped into conversations with people who knew Damian. Caleb was the easiest place to start. You've known Damian for a while, right? I asked during a phone call. Yeah, Caleb replied, his voice cautious. Why? I've just been thinking about the party, I said, trying to keep my tone light. He seems comfortable with Sophia. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ethan, you know Damian, Caleb said finally. He's friendly with everyone. Don't read too much into it. Friendly with everyone. It sounded like Caleb was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince me. The next time I saw Rachel, I brought up Damian again. Rachel had always been a straight shooter, and I trusted her to give me an honest opinion. What do you think of Damian? I asked over coffee. Rachel's expression darkened. I think he's trouble, she said bluntly. I don't trust him. Never have. Why? I pressed. She hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. He has a history, Ethan. I don't know all the details, but I've heard things. He's ruined relationships before, gets too close to women who are already taken. It's like a game to him. A game. The word made my stomach churn. Was that what Damian was doing with Sophia? Playing a game? And if so, how far had it gone? A few days later, James called me back. His tone was serious, and I could tell he'd uncovered something significant. You were right to be suspicious, he said. Damian's been sued twice for breach of contract, art commissions he never delivered on. He's also been involved in a few messy breakups, though nothing illegal. Just morally questionable. Morally questionable, I echoed, gripping the phone tighter. Like what? One of the cases involved a married woman, James said carefully. He was seeing her on the side, and when her husband found out, things got ugly. Damian played the victim, of course, but there were plenty of witnesses who said he was the instigator. I clenched my jaw, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. Damian wasn't just charming. He was calculated. He knew exactly how to exploit people's weaknesses, how to insert himself into their lives and wreak havoc. And now, it seemed, he had set his sights on Sophia. That night, I confronted her again. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if everything was perfectly normal. We need to talk, I said, standing in front of her. She sighed, setting her phone down. Again? What now, Ethan? I've been looking into Damian, I said, watching her carefully. Do you know about his past? About the other marriages he's interfered with? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the lawsuits, the breakups, the messes he's left behind, I said, my voice rising. This isn't just about you and me anymore, Sophia. Damian is dangerous, and if you can't see that, then you're blind. She stared at me, her face pale. Ethan, I didn't know. Didn't you? I asked, my tone sharp. Or did you choose not to know because it was easier than facing the truth? She didn't respond, and the silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw something crack in her, an uncertainty, a vulnerability she rarely showed. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I'm not going to sit back and let Damian destroy our marriage, I said firmly. If you care about us, about me, then you need to make a choice. Him or me. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out, and as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if she even knew the answer. The fallout from my quiet investigation into Damian didn't just affect Sophia and me. It rippled through our entire social circle like a slow-moving storm. Our friends, the people we'd shared dinners, vacations, and countless memories with, suddenly found themselves picking sides. And as much as I hated to admit it, their opinions mattered more than I expected. It started with Rachel. She had always been my closest ally, and after I told her what James had uncovered about Damian, her support was unwavering. You're doing the right thing, she said during one of our regular coffee meetups. People like Damian thrive on chaos. If you don't push back, he'll only get bolder. Her words bolstered me, but they didn't make the tension any easier to bear. Especially not when Caleb called. Ethan, I've been hearing things, Caleb said, his tone unusually cautious. Apparently, you've been digging into Damian? You heard right, I said bluntly. I've learned enough about him to know he's trouble. Caleb sighed, and I could almost picture him rubbing his temples on the other end of the line. Look, I get that you're upset about the party, but Damian's not a bad guy. He's just misunderstood. Misunderstood? I repeated, my voice sharp. Caleb, he's wrecked marriages before. This isn't about misunderstanding. It's about him preying on vulnerabilities. Do you even hear yourself? Caleb shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. You sound paranoid, Ethan. Not everything's a conspiracy. It was clear Caleb had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. His defense of Damian stung more than I cared to admit, but I didn't push further. There was no point arguing with someone who had already made up his mind. Sophia's closest friend, Lila, was another wild card. She'd always been fiercely loyal to Sophia, but lately, her loyalty seemed strained. At a small gathering, she pulled me aside, her voice low so no one else could hear. I don't know what's going on between you and Sophia, she began, her eyes darting nervously around the room, but you're not wrong about Damian. I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by her admission. What do you mean? I mean he's not who he pretends to be, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I've seen how he operates, charming his way into people's lives, pushing boundaries until things spiral out of control. He's dangerous, Ethan. Then why haven't you said anything? I asked, my frustration mounting. Because Sophia doesn't want to hear it, she replied, her expression pained. I've tried to warn her, but she shuts me down every time. She's different when it comes to him. Different. The word lingered in my mind, fueling the growing sense of unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The real tipping point came during a dinner party at Rachel's house. It was a smaller group, just Rachel, James, Lila, Caleb, Sophia, and me, but the tension was palpable from the moment we arrived. Caleb barely spoke to me, while Rachel and James stuck close, their loyalty clear in their subtle but supportive gestures. Lila hovered awkwardly, torn between her friendship with Sophia and her growing unease about Damian. The elephant in the room didn't stay hidden for long. So, Caleb said midway through dinner, his tone overly casual, are we going to talk about the fact that Ethan's been playing detective, or are we just pretending everything's fine? Rachel set her fork down with a little too much force. Maybe we should be talking about why he needed to investigate in the first place. Sophia stiffened beside me, her eyes darting between Caleb and Rachel. This isn't the time or place, she said quietly, but Caleb wasn't having it. Come on, Sophia, he said, his frustration clear. You can't seriously be okay with Ethan digging into Damian's past like this. It's invasive and unnecessary. It's not unnecessary, I interjected, my voice calm but firm. Damian isn't who he pretends to be, and you know it, Caleb. You're just too blind to see it. Blind. Caleb snapped, his face flushing. Or maybe I'm just not paranoid enough to believe every piece of gossip I hear. Gossip? Rachel cut in, her voice sharp. This isn't gossip, Caleb. Damian has a pattern, and Sophia's caught in it. Sophia's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. Enough, she said, her voice trembling. I'm not some pawn in your conspiracy theories. Damian's a friend, nothing more. Her words hung in the air, but no one seemed convinced. Least of all me. As the night wore on, the divisions in our group became impossible to ignore. Caleb left early, muttering something about drama, while Rachel pulled me aside to reassure me of her support. Lila lingered, looking torn, before finally slipping out with a quiet, "Take care, Ethan." When Sophia and I got home, the silence between us was deafening. I wanted to believe her, to trust that Damian was nothing more than a passing distraction. But the cracks in our marriage were widening, and the weight of our friends' divided loyalties only made it harder to see a way forward. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought consumed me. The people in our lives were choosing sides, but the only one who truly mattered was Sophia. And right now, I wasn't sure if she was choosing me. The days following the dinner party at Rachel's house felt like a chess game. Every move calculated, every word carefully chosen. The lines had been drawn, and it was clear that some people in our circle would never see Damian for what he truly was. But I wasn't interested in changing their minds. My focus was on Sophia, and on exposing Damian before he could cause more damage. The cracks in Sophia's facade were beginning to show. She was quieter at home, less defensive than she'd been in weeks, but still unwilling to fully confront the situation. I could see the internal conflict eating at her, the way she avoided meeting my eyes when I asked pointed questions about Damian. It was as if she didn't know which version of the story to believe. The charming, harmless man Damian pretended to be, or the manipulative predator I knew he was. Meanwhile, Rachel and James were my anchors. Over coffee one morning, Rachel leaned forward, her tone serious. "Ethan, if you're going to confront Damian, you need to do it strategically. He thrives on chaos, so you can't let him twist the narrative." "I'm not going to give him that chance," I said firmly. "But I need more. Something concrete. People like Caleb won't believe words. They need proof." James chimed in, his legal mind already working. "I've been looking into some of Damian's past connections. One of his former clients, a woman named Ava, might be willing to talk. She had a falling out with him a couple of years ago over a financial dispute and some personal boundaries he crossed. It's a long shot, but if she's willing to share her story, it could add credibility to what you're saying." It felt like a small light in the tunnel I'd been wandering through. "Reach out to her," I said. "Let her know I'm willing to listen." While James pursued that lead, Rachel worked on a different angle. She had a knack for navigating social circles and knew how to gather information without raising suspicions. Within days, she'd uncovered a series of text messages Damian had sent to another married woman in our circle. The messages were flirtatious, towing the line between playful and inappropriate, and they painted a clear picture of Damian's pattern: charm, manipulate, and divide. I felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but I needed more to bring Sophia to my side. That's when Lila called me. Her voice was hesitant, but there was a determination beneath the surface. "I know I've been quiet," she said, "but I want to help. I've seen what Damian's done to other people, and I can't sit back and let him do it again. Tell me what you need." Lila's offer caught me off guard, but I wasn't going to waste it. "Damian trusts you," I said. "Use that. Get close to him. See what he's willing to share when he thinks no one's watching." It was a risky move, but Lila was willing to take it. Over the next week, she began meeting Damian for coffee and casual outings, all under the guise of friendship. She played the part perfectly, laughing at his jokes and feigning interest in his stories. And slowly, Damian began to reveal his true colors. "He's arrogant," Lila told me during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "He thinks he's untouchable. He even bragged about how easy it is to win people over if you know what buttons to push. That arrogance would be his downfall. Finally, the breakthrough came when James managed to contact Ava. She was hesitant at first, wary of dredging up old wounds, but eventually, she agreed to meet with me. Sitting across from her at a quiet cafe, I listened as she recounted her experience with Damian, how he'd charmed his way into her life, manipulated her trust, and ultimately left her reputation in tatters when she tried to cut ties. "I wish I'd seen through him sooner," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "If sharing my story helps someone else avoid the same mistake, I'm willing to do it." Armed with Ava's testimony, Rachel's evidence, and Lila's observations, I felt the momentum shifting. It was time to confront Damian, not just for my sake, but for Sophia's, and for everyone else he'd hurt or might hurt in the future. The plan was simple but strategic. I would invite Damian to another gathering, a smaller one hosted by Caleb, where I knew he'd feel comfortable. With Rachel, James, and Lila at my side, I'd present the evidence, calmly, confidently, and without giving Damian the chance to deflect. As the day of the confrontation approached, I felt a strange mix of nerves and resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for the truth, for my dignity, and for the people Damian had deceived. This time, the game was on my terms, and Damian wouldn't see it coming. The evening of the confrontation arrived like the calm before a storm. I could feel the tension in my chest, my resolve steeling itself with every passing second. Caleb had agreed to host the gathering, reluctantly, of course. He still wasn't convinced Damian was as manipulative as I knew him to be, but he couldn't resist the drama simmering beneath the surface. For someone like Caleb, curiosity always outweighed caution. Sophia was quiet as we got ready, her usual confidence subdued. She hadn't asked many questions about the evening, and I hadn't offered much information. I wasn't sure where her loyalty lay anymore, but tonight wasn't about convincing her. It was about showing her the truth. By the time we arrived, the room was already buzzing. The gathering was smaller than Caleb's usual affairs, just a dozen or so of our closest friends, but the air was heavy with anticipation. Damian was there, of course, holding court near the bar with his usual charm. He smiled when he saw Sophia and me enter, raising his glass in a mock salute. The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. Rachel and James were already in position, seated near the center of the room, their expressions carefully neutral. Lila hovered near Damian, playing her part to perfection, her laughter ringing out at just the right moments to keep his guard down. And then there was Ava, standing discreetly near the edge of the room, her presence a quiet reminder of why this confrontation mattered. As the evening wore on, the conversation inevitably turned toward relationships and trust, a carefully orchestrated shift guided by Rachel's skillful questions. Caleb, ever the host, poured more drinks and encouraged the banter, oblivious to the trap being laid. And then, when the moment felt right, I made my move. "You know," I began, my voice cutting through the chatter, "it's interesting how trust works. It's so easy to give, but once it's broken, it's almost impossible to repair." The room went quiet, all eyes turning to me. Damian raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Are we getting philosophical tonight, Ethan?" "Not philosophical," I said evenly, locking eyes with him. "Just practical. Trust is everything, Damian. And when someone exploits it for their own gain, it's only a matter of time before the truth catches up to them." Damian's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "That's a bold statement. Care to elaborate?" "Gladly," I said, standing from my chair. "You've built your reputation on charm, on knowing exactly how to win people over. But behind that charm is a pattern of manipulation, deceit, and destruction." The tension in the room was palpable now. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing between Damian and me. Sophia looked frozen, her eyes wide as she tried to process what was happening. Damian chuckled, his tone dismissive. "That's quite the accusation, Ethan. Got any proof to back it up?" "Actually, I do," I said, signaling to James. He stood, holding a folder containing the evidence we'd gathered, text messages, financial documents, and Ava's testimony. Rachel chimed in, her voice calm but firm, as she detailed Damian's history of exploiting relationships and ruining lives. And then Ava stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I trusted you, Damian," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "I believed in you, and you used me. You manipulated me, just like you've done to so many others." Damian's facade cracked. He tried to laugh it off, to spin the narrative in his favor, but the weight of the evidence was too much. The whispers in the room grew louder, and the carefully crafted image he'd built began to crumble. Sophia's face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. I turned to her, my voice soft but firm. "This is who you've been defending, Sophia. This is the man you've let come between us." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. The room felt suffocating now, the weight of the truth pressing down on all of us. Damian, realizing he'd lost control of the room, stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he spat, his charm completely gone. "You're all buying into some vendetta. I don't have to stand here and listen to this." He stormed out, the door slamming behind him, but the damage was done. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Caleb let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, his voice uncertain, "that was intense." I ignored him, my focus entirely on Sophia. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ethan, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You just didn't want to see it." The evening ended in a haze of goodbyes and hushed conversations, but the confrontation had achieved what I'd hoped for. Damian's reputation was shattered, his lies exposed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I drove Sophia and myself home, the real question lingered in my mind. Was this enough to save us? Or had the damage already been done? The days after the confrontation were like standing in the eye of a storm. Damian was gone, at least for now, but the wreckage he'd left behind wasn't so easily cleared away. The friends who had once idolized him now spoke of him in hushed tones, embarrassed that they'd been fooled. Caleb, who had defended Damian to the very end, avoided me completely. But none of that mattered as much as what lingered between Sophia and me. For the first time in what felt like months, she was quiet, truly quiet. No excuses, no deflections, just an unsettling stillness. It wasn't the cold, detached silence she'd used to shut me out before. This was different. This was the silence of someone who had finally come face to face with the truth and didn't know how to process it. One evening, as I sat on the porch nursing a beer, she joined me. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down in the chair beside me, her hands folded in her lap. The air between us felt heavy, but I waited, giving her the space to speak first. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke the silence. "I don't even know where to start," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Try the beginning," I replied, keeping my tone even. "That usually works." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring absently. "I was wrong," she said, the words tumbling out like they had been waiting for release. "About Damian, about the party, about everything. I let him get too close, and I ignored all the warning signs because I wanted to feel something." The admission hit me harder than I expected. I had known it, of course, her need for validation, her longing for excitement, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I thought he made me feel alive," she continued, her voice trembling. "But he wasn't the problem. I was. I let myself believe that you weren't enough because I didn't want to face the fact that I wasn't enough, for myself, for you, for anyone." Her honesty was like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was what I had been waiting for. Accountability, vulnerability, a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with. But on the other hand, it laid bare the depth of the cracks in our marriage, the ways we had both failed each other over the years. "Why now?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Why are you telling me this now, after everything?" "Because I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm scared I've ruined everything, that I've lost you. And I don't want that, Ethan. I don't want to lose you." The rawness in her voice was almost too much to bear. For weeks, I had been angry, furious, even, But now, as I looked at her, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Sincerity. She wasn't just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. She was finally speaking the truth. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly, the words heavy in my mouth. "Not yet, but I'm willing to try, if you're willing to do the work." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. "Therapy, counseling, anything. I'll prove it to you." That night marked the beginning of a slow and painful process. We started couples counseling, a move I had resisted for years but now saw as a necessity. The sessions were hard, grueling, even. We unpacked years of resentment, misunderstandings, and unmet expectations. There were moments when I wanted to walk out, when the weight of everything felt too heavy to carry. But each time, Sophia surprised me. She didn't retreat, didn't deflect. She faced every hard truth head-on, even when it made her cry. She also started making changes on her own. She stepped back from the social scene that had consumed so much of her energy, focusing instead on rebuilding her relationship with me and with herself. She spent more time with the kids, her laughter ringing through the house in a way it hadn't in years. And slowly, cautiously, I began to let my guard down. One night, as we sat together on the couch after the kids were asleep, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes cutting through the lingering doubt in my heart. "Thank you for proving it was worth not giving up." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Life rarely is. There were still moments of tension, still nights when the memories of what had happened threatened to resurface. But there was also hope, fragile but growing stronger with each passing day. In the end, Sophia's redemption wasn't about grand gestures or quick fixes. It was about the small, consistent actions that slowly rebuilt the trust between us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same side again, fighting not against each other, but for each other. And that, more than anything, gave me hope for the future. As Sophia and I worked to rebuild the fragile remains of our relationship, I couldn't shake the sense that Damian's reckoning wasn't fully complete. He had stormed out of Caleb's gathering humiliated, but men like Damian didn't just disappear quietly. They bided their time, waiting for the right moment to claw their way back into relevance. I wasn't about to give him that chance. I wasn't alone in this. Lila, who had been instrumental in gathering the evidence that exposed Damian, reached out to me a few weeks after the confrontation. Her voice was calm but laced with urgency. "Ethan, there's more you need to know." "About Damian?" I asked, already bracing myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. "Yes," she said. "I've been digging deeper and I found something personal. I didn't want to bring it up before, but I think you deserve to know." We met at a quiet cafe later that week. Lila sat across from me, her usual confident demeanor softened by a hint of unease. She slid a folder across the table, her fingers lingering on it for a moment before letting go. Inside were photos, emails, and handwritten notes, all pieces of a story I hadn't expected. Damian hadn't just manipulated Sophia or Ava. Years ago, he'd done the same to Lila. The details were eerily familiar. The charm, the subtle boundary pushing, the gradual erosion of trust. He had nearly destroyed her career by spreading false rumors when she tried to cut ties with him. "I thought I'd moved on," Lila said, her voice quiet. But seeing him worm his way into Sophia's life brought it all back. I couldn't let him do to her, or to you, what he did to me. Her revelation hit me like a freight train. Damian's pattern of manipulation wasn't just a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was deliberate, calculated, and personal. He thrived on breaking people down, and for years, he had gotten away with it. "What do you want to do with this?" I asked, gesturing to the folder. Lila's eyes hardened. "I want people to know who he really is. No more hiding, no more excuses. He's built his entire life on lies, and it's time those lies caught up with him." With Lila's permission, I shared the contents of the folder with James and Rachel. Together, we worked to compile a detailed account of Damian's manipulations, reaching out to others who had been affected by him. What emerged was a damning portrait of a man who had spent years preying on the vulnerabilities of those around him. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Social circles buzzed with whispers, and Damian's name quickly became synonymous with deceit. His professional reputation, already shaky, crumbled under the weight of the revelations. Clients withdrew their support, and invitations to high-profile events disappeared. For the first time, Damian found himself on the outside looking in. He tried to fight back, of course, denying the accusations, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Even Caleb, who had defended Damian for so long, finally admitted defeat. "He's toxic," Caleb said during a phone call. "I don't know how I didn't see it before, but you were right, Ethan. You were right about everything." The vindication was bittersweet. Damian's downfall didn't erase the damage he had caused, but it brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. More importantly, it gave Sophia and me a chance to move forward without his shadow looming over us. As for Lila, she found her own peace in finally confronting the man who had wronged her. "It's not about revenge," she told me after everything was said and done. "It's about accountability. And now, he has to face it." Damian's reign of manipulation was over, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The path ahead was still uncertain, but at least now, it was ours to walk, free from the weight of his deception. In the weeks following Damian's downfall, life began to take on a different rhythm. The storm had passed, leaving behind the wreckage of what had been, but also the promise of a fresh start. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of anger and humiliation lift from my shoulders. The truth was out, and Damian was gone. His influence over Sophia and our social circle obliterated. But the journey wasn't over. The hardest part, the rebuilding, had just begun. Sophia was trying. I'll give her that. Every day, she showed up in ways she hadn't in years. It wasn't just the big gestures, though those were there too. The long, heartfelt conversations, the counseling sessions she scheduled without hesitation, the quiet but sincere apologies. It was also the small things. The way she asked about my day and listened, really listened. The way she made an effort to reconnect with our kids, her laughter filling the house in a way I hadn't realized I'd missed. But trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. It's a slow, painstaking process, and there were still moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and my mind had room to wander, I'd replay everything that had happened. The party, the arguments, the confrontation, and wonder if we were fooling ourselves. Could we really come back from this? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? It was during one of those sleepless nights that Sophia surprised me. She found me sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkened street, lost in thought. Without a word, she sat down beside me, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I know it's going to take time," she said softly, as if reading my mind. "I know I hurt you, Ethan. I know I broke something I might never fully fix. But I'm not going to stop trying." Her honesty caught me off guard. For so long, I had been bracing myself for excuses, for deflections. But this was different. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was offering accountability. "It's not just about trying," I said after a long pause. "It's about understanding why it happened in the first place. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I know, and I'm starting to understand it now. I let myself get caught up in needing validation, in chasing excitement, because I didn't know how to face the things I was unhappy with, about myself, about us. But I want to face them now. I want to do the work, Ethan. I want to do it with you." We sat there for a long time, the silence between us no longer heavy but tentative, like the first few steps across a bridge you're not sure will hold. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a start. Over the next few months, we began to rebuild, piece by piece. Counseling became a lifeline, a space where we could speak openly about our fears and frustrations. We started spending more time together, not out of obligation, but because we wanted to. The walls that had grown between us didn't disappear overnight, but they started to crack, letting in slivers of light. Our social circle shifted, too. Caleb eventually apologized, admitting that he'd been blinded by his loyalty to Damian. Rachel and James remained steadfast allies, their support a constant reminder that we didn't have to face this alone. Even Lila found a sense of closure, her own healing journey intertwining with ours in unexpected ways. The biggest change, though, was in me. For so long, I had defined myself by my role as a husband, a provider, a steady presence. But through this process, I realized I needed to rediscover who I was outside of those roles. I started pursuing things I'd set aside for years, hobbies, friendships, ambitions, and found a renewed sense of purpose in the process. One night, as we sat together on the couch, Sophia turned to me with a small, tentative smile. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I think we're getting there," I said honestly. "And that's enough for now." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it didn't need to be. Life isn't about perfection, it's about progress. And as we moved forward, step by step, I found myself believing in the possibility of something better. Not the life we had before, but something new, something stronger, a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful.